for me to be able to relate to my athletes. I always felt that I had to relate, and that proved that it was really much more about understanding the needs and the demands of the course, the athlete, and that put that to bed for me at least. So coaching Ironman, it is something that is one of the most rewarding things. To me, it is the pinnacle of our sport. And if I were to kind of say, a lot of people find this the ultimate distance, and it is the thing that everyone thinks they want to aspire to, whether that's right or wrong. It is a mammoth of a race, and it requires the utmost preparation, dedication, and I think that it's a really cool journey and a cool process. And so it is unique, and so we have to treat it somewhat uniquely, and not everybody will be ready right away to go and do an Ironman. We need to kind of get people prepared and staged to take on the distance in life, as well as physically and mentally. So from an overview, this event is a bike-heavy event, and most triathlons are bike-heavy, but 80% of the distance is a bike race. And whether we like it or not, our athletes, to be successful, have to bike a lot. So if they don't like to bike, you're going to have some struggles there. So just an observation of, what does this thing look like? The swim, a lot of athletes will find they struggle with that in the beginning if they're newer. And then by the time they're the most seasoned Ironman athletes, they say the swim is kind of just like, a throwaway. It's a layup in some ways. So this is a huge, huge, huge life accomplishment. Huge. And the people that you will be working with will depend upon you, will rely on you to more or less guide them. And so you will be a rock star to them in the best way. And it's a really special relationship. I have a soft spot for every person I've ever coached at this distance. And it's because of the implicit trust that goes into getting somebody prepared for an event like this. So some of the things about the distance in general, overall raw stamina is a huge focus, and just endurance, the ability to go for a very long time. The mind comes into play, your body, your fortitude to endure is a big hallmark of this distance. So it is a major life achievement that your athletes are going to want to share a lot of things that they're doing with you. I tend to find for our athletes that do this, I don't like to take them on at the sea level because it caps the amount of communication that we can have with the athlete somewhat. You can communicate as much as you want. It's up to you as a coach. But at least what they're provided with, the expectation is that they're going to have a consult once a month. So I generally try to keep people at that B or A level, just so we can communicate a little bit more. All right, so keys to success: staying healthy, being able to push consistently, mentally and physical boundaries. You need to be somewhat self-sufficient and staying focused, seeing the big picture, and that's for you as well as the coach. And being able to adapt. So when things go wrong, how do you pivot and get yourself back in the game? Because it is such a massive undertaking, and you're kind of watching this fitness rise and the skills rise and the confidence rise, and it's it's almost like steering a giant battleship. From time to time you have to make sure you're on track, and you have to get that alignment right from way far out. So it is a major time commitment, Ironman distance racing. We've talked about in previous calls the continuous training load and what's required for beginners to just finish the distance. I think they need to have a continuous training load of a minimum of about 70. And that might be, on the lower side, and as well, those athletes will still struggle on the day. If they have higher thresholds, then that's fine. They'll be more successful. If they have lower thresholds, they need to have more fitness, and they need to have a higher CTL. Our intermediate athletes at this distance are going to be somewhere around 100 to 115 CTL, and our advanced are going to start really at about 120 to 150, and our pros go Yeah, sometimes up a little bit north of that, but depends on who they are and how long they've been training, racing, and beyond 170, it's debatable whether or not they really have their thresholds accurate. Clear goals. You need to really have these in mind for your athletes. You need to understand what it is that they're asking you to do, a plan for their success, and what happens when they don't achieve them. What are you going to do to help them get past their hurdles? Because it's really about troubleshooting. And I think that's pretty much, well, I've got a few more. Yeah, I got another slide to go through. So overview as the coach. I touched on this for a brief moment, but the trust piece is essential. And I know that if you're sitting there saying, I don't have Ironman coaching experience, how do I get that trust and gain that trust? You really have to fall into the plans. Come back to this table here with us, and help yourself and help your athletes. So you always have that as the backdrop. Is you've got the ability to leverage a lot of coaches' minds here at this program. So you will be able to get back to them, give them that, impart with them a great plan, as well as, establishing that trust from early on. So you can offer up your mind as coach, and, some people need different things. Some people are just hey, I need a check-in. I need to get it done. Your athletes are looking to make sure that you are receiving them and looking at their sessions and making notes on, how they're progressing, and they want to hear your feedback. They're going to look to that, especially at this distance, because they're unsure. And they should be unsure, because it's a mammoth distance. It's not like saying, would you have this same fear and would you have the same mindfulness if you were talking about a sprint? Of course not. You're going to finish it. You're going to survive it. So communication, honesty on both the athlete's part and yours. So you've got to be transparent. What are you expecting? What are they expecting? And when that's open communication, then things tend to go a lot more nicely. And I think if you're honest about what you think their potential is, and if a lot of athletes, the first conversation is, I want to do X time at this distance. I want to perform. I want to have this time, like this pace, this power. And your response to that is, I want that for you too, but it's finish. The goal is always first finish, because these races are long, hard, and we can't predict the conditions. We can't predict how you're going to fare in the final 6 weeks under a massive training load like you've never done before, especially if you're a beginner. And if you're an advanced athlete, even the best of plans and training goes sideways. So we see pros humbled all the time at this distance. And I think that's what makes it so polarizing and so amazing to work with these types of athletes in these distances. I personally did 19 of them and loved every single one of them. Even the worst ones were awesome. I learned something about myself. It was a journey every single time. And including the prep, I think that's special. So you're offering your mind as a coach. We talked about communication. One plan. Does your athlete do the plan? You have a low margin of error with this type of event. If they're not doing the work, they're not going to do well. If they miss things, you can't guarantee certain things. But, does that mean that they should just pull out and say, oh, I didn't do a session, I missed, for 1 5-hour bike ride because it was my niece's birthday? Like, of course not. They're going to be fine. And you need to encourage them that that's okay and that life gets in the way. We're not professionals, we're not coaching professionals, but we are all trying to be better, our own best image of ourselves in these races. So belief, I said that before, touched on that. They need to believe in you. They need to have the structure. That's pretty much inherent in what they're doing in their plan. Clarity, we talked a little bit about that. TriStar long course knowledge base. So, there are tons of resources that I have already given to you guys, but that I keep adding on a weekly and monthly basis to this distance in particular, because so many people need information on how to do it successfully. So keep leveraging that. Openness. And lastly, responsibly training athletes and coaching them, I think that's kind of a no-brainer there. But you've got somebody's life in your hands, and you're going to tell them to do something every single weekend, and you better know what that means to take care of them. They're yours to take care of. All right, so we've got some different things to think about in terms of our athletes: training to finish, training for a personal best, training to qualify, and pure enjoyment. Okay, everybody slots into different spectrums on this at different times in their career. Some Ironman athletes, right out of the gate, their goal is to qualify, and some say, hey, my goal is to just finish. And maybe that's not this year, maybe it's even 2 years from now. So you may have a roadmap you have to provide for these folks. So if you're training to finish, you're certainly more on the beginner side, and right, you have heart rate limitations, perhaps you have, you have to watch injury. You're not forged, quote unquote. When you go through an Ironman process of training, you successfully actually forge yourself, almost like come out of the print mold stronger, right? Your tendons, your muscles are stronger. They're able to adapt. They're able to take a longer session more than ever before. And just the act of finishing an Ironman alone immediately resets the entire plumbing of the heart, the strength, and the tendons, which started long before when they were preparing in the final 8 weeks of their training. But it's an evolution to get them across the line. And so when they're training to finish, right, that is the goal that you're kind of anchoring them towards. And, it's less commitment to performance-based at that point. Whereas somebody, as you're looking to train them for a personal best, then we have to investigate a lot more specifics. We have to investigate, what did they do before? What were their thresholds? What were their previous splits for a 70.3? What are their weaknesses? What courses are they selecting? Even probably more specifically, what courses are they selecting? And if you want somebody who wants a personal best and they're saying, put me at Ironman Lake Placid, and oh, by the way, my previous PR was at Ironman Arizona, you got a tall drink of water to kind of get somebody to PR on that course. So you kind of have to know the physical dimensions of each athlete, right? Everybody carries a different watts per kilo that they can get successfully through a bike without, tipping over and having a bad marathon. So, for men and for women, that weight is going to become an issue. And depending on how hilly the course is, how hot it is, all that sort of thing. Now, training to qualify. You will have athletes who will present themselves to you as interested in training to qualify. This is a very specific conversation that a lot of people have this dream. And it's an amazing dream. And I'm going to tell you that the odds of qualifying are fairly low. But if you put your best foot forward and you are really, really wanting it bad, I do fundamentally believe that, barring some sort of physical problem, pretty much most people, if they really burn hot for it, can get there in some way or another. But it will take a massive constitution, a person who is super devoted. Nothing gets in their way. A mountain is not in their way. They can easily go through the mountain, and they'll go over it, through it. Nothing will stop them. But you need to be very upfront with those athletes about how the process starts, what does it look like where they are at now, and painting the picture that their endurance, and where they are in their experience level may take them quite some years to get there. And are they willing to, go through the success and the failure that's inherent in getting there, and the sacrifice? Because it's super easy to say when you're, sitting there watching the Ironman World Championships and the TV's in front of you, and you're having some nice refreshments, enjoying the show, and then you say, that looks like something I want to do. When in reality, every single one of those athletes that's out there had some story of how much they had to sacrifice to get there. And I think that's probably the one thing where I find most athletes that come to me are misaligned with, when they say that. It's so amazing when they say it. It's like music to my ears. But at the same time, then you need to get them to convince you. They need to convince you that this is what they absolutely want and they must have. And so usually the first conversation is kind of like I'm discussing with you, but I'm an optimist. So I always paint this as an optimist, and here's how we go, and here's how we're going to go systematically about it. But it's until they really push me multiple times and say, I can't live without this, that I really start to move them so much more directionally that way and treat them a little bit as a different athlete too. So that's, I kind of get on the soapbox a little bit for that one, but because of the fact that your Ironman athletes are effectively all drawn to this distance and pulled together by the Ironman World Championships. That is the World Series for not only Ironman, but for 70.3, for every distance sprint. When you say the word triathlon, that evokes the image. So that's a cool one to have. And when you get somebody that comes your way like that, that's a very rare athlete. There are a lot of great ways to get into the race too through the lottery.
Just gonna say, there's more than one way to qualify.
Right. That's exactly.
There's a lot of ways to skin that cat.
Amen to that. And
I'm working them all.
That's right. And you know what? That's an avenue that we explore with our athletes. Absolutely. Like, why should you not, right, push yourself to try to do it, whether through the lottery or you try to do it through 12 races. And then, truth be told, it's an expensive venture that these folks are going under. So there are some times when buying a slot outright is an option. And it's a weird option, but it's at the same time, these people, if they really ultimately just want to race that race, okay, most people would say they're and I'm not going to get too much into the philosophy of this, but would say that's a crime, that's a shame. No, that's a way into the race. That the rules are set. This is how you get in. And
if you buy a charity slot, it costs about it's actually
it's cheaper.
That's not my plan. But if I get to 60 and I haven't qualified yet, it could happen. But buying a charity slot, that money goes to charity, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that, and it also is probably cost less than doing 12. So but my goal is that by the time I qualify, whether it's from 12 or age group, I actually feel like I deserve and own being there. Do you know what I mean?
I totally agree with you.
If it takes me 10 years to get there, I'm going to be freaking ready to get there.
Amen. Amen to that. Yep, I agree. So you need to know the options when your athletes talk to you about this stuff and understand what's behind it. So lastly, I put this in here as the enjoyment factor. I think that most have a very, a performance-based approach to it, but then there are some that just want to enjoy it. I want to enjoy the day. I want to see the fruits of my labor. I don't need to suffer. I don't need to, I want the medal. I want my family to be there. I want to have a great experience. And so those types of folks also will have a less competitive drive. They're not going to want to suffer perhaps as much. They're not going to push themselves as much. Nothing wrong with that. And I think that that's a wonderful way to go about the race as well. All right, so we're going to get specific to swim, bike, run. So training for the Ironman swim. Your beginners will think that this is the hardest part of the day, and your more advanced athletes will find this easiest part of the day. And that's simply because your beginners are going to be out there a heck of a lot longer. They're going to be holding the breath, breathing hard, breathing easy, and trying to get through the water with some level of panic that your advanced athletes are just not going to have. And so for that reason, you do need to spend a little more time, with drill work with these athletes, and you need to spend some time making sure that they're confident going across the entire distance, right? Hey, big confidence boost today. I swam 4,200 yards in the pool, in open water, like put it to bed. I'm going to finish the swim. That for your newbie is going to be really important. Your advanced athletes can tolerate more swim volume during training, but they can also ramp it up a lot closer to their race, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So it is the shortest part of the day proportionately. The benefits of Ironman swim training, right? It's non-impact aerobic work, so you get a lot of fat burning capability. Big picture there is, if you need to get more volume into a more beginner athletes program, that's the place to do it. So for your intermediate and then more advanced, they may find that they spend more time on the bike because they're more time crunched. So swimming does improve your race efficiency if you are more aerobic. So that's why swimming in general, it's kind of like an endless budget. I really like people to do a lot of swimming, but the time commitment usually is what bars people from doing quite a bit of it. So I said before, identify swim stroke inefficiency. Are you a sub 60-minute swimmer? If you're not, then you have a stroke limiter. This is kind of weird because there's a certain speed that actually, we find about 125 per 100, where anything less than that really says that either you're really out of shape, if you're an advanced athlete, or you have a stroke limiter. And that means that everybody, to an extent, has some sort of stroke limiter. Everybody. And unless you had a really high level swim background when you were younger, then that time is going to be a pretty hard to achieve kind of goal. So most of your middle of the pack folks are going to be an hour 15 to an hour 20, and then slower is up to close to that 2 hour range. And you want to make that day make the day not as long as possible. And the swim training and early on coaching your athletes to make sure that they're stroke proficient and working on their limiters is what you want to do. The focus should be on muscular endurance in the pool. We have a lot of boomerang fitness that's coming from the other disciplines, a lot. And what I mean by that is you basically are building up all this cardiovascular conditioning on the bike and on the run. So do we need to do a ton of volume in the water? Not really, because you're already getting it somewhere else. So you need to be functionally, muscularly strong in the pool, and you need to be very efficient in the pool. That's kind of the nutshell of Ironman racing for the swim. Pause there for a second. Attila, you still with us?
I am, yeah.
Great. I just want to make sure you can still hear us and that you were on the call. All good. Just want to pause there for a second and find out if there was any questions that you had, or Kyle or Megan, questions you guys have.
I have a question.
Yeah, fire away.
The swim kind of perplexes me more than any other discipline because I feel like, with the run and the bike, you can build that engine and it's fairly straightforward. There are mechanics involved, but it feels like the swim, there are like two completely opposite mindsets where one is really like form trumps all, and the other one is like if you put in the distance, your form will improve because you're going to have the cardiovascular fitness to like keep yourself afloat. But you look online and you can get really mixed up. So for something like Ironman where, if you have a good swim, you can conserve a lot of energy for the rest of that race. Where do you kind of fall on that one where you don't get the same information looking at someone's swim workouts that you do on the bike or the run because you're not seeing how efficient they're swimming?
Yeah, it's a great point because water is 80 times more dense than air. So if you have bad form or you can't hold best form, effectively, you're working a lot harder. And if you get out of the water and you have to suddenly ride harder to catch the lead group or something like that, that's a huge disadvantage because we know that this is a race that you want to pace and start easy and then go harder. So I would say as far as the focus and the cardio versus the strength piece, form trumps almost everything, right? If you can hold best form, then once you've established that, then your athletes can look to do a lot more strength work. And then there's different builds that are more successful in swimming, right? How long you are in the water matters, how strong your lats are, how well can you actually catch the water, what does your kick look like, what is your body position in the water. And so, at the Ironman distance, it's amazing, but some athletes don't have the ability or know how to draft very well. And so the times, it's amazing. It is amazing that you see some people come out of the water in 60 minutes and then the rest of their day might be like 7 hours on the bike, or it might be, you know, a 5-hour marathon, which is totally cool. But then you see sometimes somebody comes out of the swim in like an hour and 20, hour 30, and then somehow they wind up qualifying with some absurd bike and run. And I'm always in my head when I see that, I'm saying, did they even touch the water? So, you know, did they get in the water in training? I think that answered your question, but tell me if I didn't answer it, Kyle. I mean, it is a complicated subject matter because of the fact that when you are trying to track your athletes and their data, they don't give you all that much. There's no heart rate to show you what's happening. But I will tell you that if you did have a lot more heart rate strap, you know, information from swimming, what you would find is that the heart rate's lower, substantially lower than biking and running. And we know that because it's low impact, you know, you're aqueous and you're sitting high in the water. There's no gravity that impact you. So you already know, your athletes are going to say my heart rate was high in the water. And the reality is it wasn't. They were really suffocating. They were having a hard time breathing. So once you get an athlete to, once their form is really in a good spot, then you need to start getting them to push themselves in the water and learn how to be uncomfortable with following in a group, a master's group or something like that. That's usually where it heads. Not your beginners. Your beginners need to just get confident in the water.
That's good.
Okay, cool. If I didn't answer it, you just keep pumping me with questions.
Oh, I'm muted. I was making a lot of comments there.
Yeah, we didn't hear a single thing. It was like crickets.
That's because I was muted.
Okay.
I think Cliff obviously nailed it. I think form and limiters are the number one thing. And I have athletes that log their heart rate, and it tells you how it's often very low, and that doesn't tell you how efficient they are, and or how hard they felt they were working a lot of the time. And I had comments like, "Oh, my heart rate was really low, but it just really felt like a hard workout," and stuff like that. I get that. I've gotten that a few times from Nadine, but I've been doing. I think that for me, like, I'm a good swimmer, but it's also the easiest where if I just start swimming a lot and I'm not thinking about it, it's really easy to develop bad form habits too. If you just try to go faster and you're not working on form.
Yeah.
I will say the biggest thing that I'm finding right now is how much. I mean, I swim a lot, but also like strength training it's amazing how just starting to be really super consistent with strength training is improving my swim again, because I kind of felt like I got into this slow Ironman swim and I was like, that's not going to come back, but it is.
Yeah.
So, but I definitely think that working on your limiters and stroke, your form are the biggest things. But strength is definitely helping. But everybody has limiters. Like Brian and I were talking about this. It's like you can't coach yourself, and you just have to always look at it.
Well, you can, but you wouldn't know the red line, would you?
I just like, well, that doesn't look so bad, But so I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've been doing a lot of video analysis and private coaching clinics now through Odyssey, because I coach open water swim, and then I have all these athletes who are now like, okay, I'm going to do my first Ironman. I want private lessons with you. And the first thing I'm like, well, the first thing we're going to do is go to the pool, because that's where I can really see your stroke. And I'm not teaching you how to sight off the buoy better until you stop kicking like that. So, yeah. So cool. I've been doing that. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And, yeah.
It's good practice. I mean, this swim is an area that you can really help your athletes quite a bit. And just have them text you a video, and it's very easy to quickly give them pointers over the phone. Say, hey, take the phone to the pool, video record yourself, just text it off to me, and give you a whole bunch of feedback. All right, moving on to the bike.
Yeah, there's a really good app, but for that too, by the way. It's literally $5, called Coach's Eye.
Yeah, it's a great app.
And you can upload a video and write all over it, and you can record a voiceover too. So
definitely a good app. Yep, it's an app that's been around for quite a few years. Almost I think 12 years. It's been around. It was one of the early app store apps for that, and I think it's still the front runner from what I could tell.
Yeah, Brian had me try a couple other things that were much more expensive, and it's the cheapest one, but it still works the best.
It's simple, yeah. All right, training the bike. Best place to put your overall effort. All right, this is another big budget that we have to have is cycling. There's less chance here of injury versus the run. People, you just got to do the time. If you're talking about sprints and Olympics, you have to be a little bit more specific and concentrated on the types of riding you're doing. You certainly have to be that way and calculated with Ironman as well. But most of your athletes, at the right time, the right amount of volume is going to do them a heck of a lot of good. Certainly you got to watch them week in and week out, but there's a lot of opportunity to be, to gain fitness. So race endurance, the ability to cover the distance, right? Our athletes, really, I try to get them to be about 80% minimum of the distance. And then at the strongest, I really like them to have, some will get up to 130-mile bike ride, for instance, once or twice in their careers if they're very, very high level. So it's a big range. But, your typical Ironman bike ride is going to be 5 to 6 hours on a weekend. It doesn't have to be every single weekend. See some of the plans that we have at TriStar are not always going to have a long ride every single weekend. Climbing on the bike, the ability to maintain the effort and energy cost of riding, not racing, all the climbs as effectively as possible. So that means getting out there, doing some rides that are hillier, so you're seeing something that's a little bit more challenging than what you will actually see on race day, so that you can tolerate it, get off the bike, and run well. So time trialing, this is another hallmark of Ironman racing, the ability to push a larger gear on a flat, rolling terrain over a long period of time. So being able to turn that gear over, because it's just economy, you're basically, forcing the heart rate low, and you're using the muscles, and that requires a lot of strength to do that. So doing some big ring work is a helpful thing to improve your athlete's ability to time trial, but we don't want them to be so focused on just low cadence work that suddenly their cadence is, less than 70 or 75 all the time. Typical cadences for Ironman racing are 79 to 85, 86 for most triathletes, and then some will get really low beneath that if they're very strong on a flat course. So total volume, it could really range. You get 15 hours on a bike for some of your athletes at peak for big ones, the really top dogs. And then a minimum requirement per week, I find is about 5 or 6 hours. If somebody's just trying to finish barely, that's going to barely get the job done. So long, slow distance is another hallmark of the 112-mile bike ride, right? You're teaching the body this economy, fat-burning ability to also tolerate taking foods and nutrition. Is a huge amount of time that has to be spent feeding and fueling, electrolytes, water. The bike leg is kind of like home base. That's where everything is happening, and there's a lot of pacing involved. Because really you're trying to take the middle stage of the booster stage of the rocket to launch the shuttle into outer space. That's basically what's happening. So that booster stage is lifting up the whole thing straight off into space, and then it's going to launch the shuttle to do the final job, and that's the marathon. And you want to think conceptually for your athletes, and I would tell this to them, that they're time trialing 200 miles, not that they're time trialing 112, because that ain't the end of the race. And if they don't factor in that it's another 26.2 miles of running, they're not going to do very well. So you've got lots of pacing restrictions that you're going to have to work with for these guys, depending on their ability. But most athletes need to have in their mind that pacing is really critical here. So cycling economy, very important. So indoor riding versus outdoor training for Ironman. Nowadays, you see athletes do all their training indoors. I do think that there's a benefit to climbing outside. Athletes tend to go a little bit harder, tend to a little bit more variable in their riding outside for Ironman training. So I kind of like to spice it up and have people ride outdoors. Certainly if they don't live in a place that's conducive to riding outside, then so be it. Group rides have limited value for our beginner athletes. Our intermediate athletes are going to have some value there, and really our top dogs are going to want to push themselves and get into group rides strategically, probably within the final 6 to 8 weeks out is kind of about right. But those are risky. They're very risky for the sake of crashes, and we don't find that very many athletes fall into that group that can actually do that. Typically, with the training for 112 miles, you get a lot of tightness, neck, back strain, you name it, hamstrings tight, psoas super tight, especially from long bricks, long runs. Like, this is a demanding sport, and it requires a lot of maintenance from all of the bike work, a lot of maintenance. So your stretching is going to be critical for your athletes to maintain that. Their strength and mobility is key too. So your key training sessions are your long ride each week, your intermediate long ride, your hilly rides, your sub-threshold rides. I call them the quasi Ironman / 70.3 rides. Those are really key too, where you kind of pump up to 70.3 effort for about 20 minutes, drop back down to 40 minutes for Ironman riding. That's a really nice set that you can do and stage that from 4 and up to 6 hours of that kind of riding. It's challenging, and you have to stay mentally very focused to do these long rides and really pump yourself up, pump your athletes up to do them. So that we're doing that in order to resist fatigue. We really are. We're trying to just get our athletes to accommodate a high amount of work rate over distance. So nutrition is key on the bike, as I mentioned, and safety. I put that in there because I do think that you need to be careful asking your athletes to do intervals and pushing themselves and putting their head down, right? They're a hurdling machine with not a whole lot of safety around them, and cars. So we know how dangerous cycling is. We want to keep our athletes safe. So please tell them it's not worth it to go and push themselves if they're going to get hurt or something's going to happen. So just remind them to, my slogan on it is, if you assume that everybody's drunk and they're all trying to kill you, you'll live. You literally assume that every single person with a car is out there trying to hurtle it at you and kill you, and you will live because you're going to anticipate a lot of things that could happen. You're not assuming and giving free rein to everybody out there who's on the road. So you're responsible for yourself. So it's kind of a funny thing to say, but I do find that when I'm out there, even just daily riding my own bike, that's something I still assume. All right, moving on to the big daddy. So the 26.2 mile marathon run. If it wasn't enough to swim for 2.4 and it wasn't enough to bike for 112, let's go for a marathon. So yeah, it is crazy. And so it's very slow when we compare it to a standalone marathon. And everybody comes off the bike who paces well and says, I feel so good, I feel so good. You gotta hold back, and unwind it slowly. When we talk about training for the 26.2 mile run and Ironman in general, we have a very high risk of injury, and we have to mitigate against that. We have to prevent that through running on soft surfaces, using best equipment like Hoka's, shoes that can really absorb some impact. We need to keep the stretching and mobility high, as I mentioned before, strength as well. And other ways to avoid injury, not stacking hard runs back to back, observing speed work with heart rate work and making sure that there's good separation. You're going to see really, really good spacing to all of this in the plans that you work with at TriStar. They're all very conservative on the run spacing. You're not going to see tons of hard work back to back, tempo runs followed by hill repeats. It's recipe for disaster. We can be strategic with our athletes. We don't need as much run volume. We need to be very specific because we have all that happening on the bike. The bike is giving us this. And so we can leverage that. And that's what we should be leveraging is the bike fitness. So learning to run, the frequency and durability in zone 1, zone 2. That's really, for our A-level athletes. They are just trying to complete the distance. Walking, running, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with building them up through walking and running. Just being on their feet for long periods of time. Our B-level athletes, right, they're building endurance and their time on their feet. And we're talking about all of our athletes. We hope to get somewhere between 17 and I'll call it even up to 22 miles, 24 miles. I don't like to go beyond too much that 18 to 22 range, because more than 22 and your recovery time is significant from that. So running in the marathon in preparation for it, we need to have muscular endurance. We can introduce some intervals and hills in build phases 1 and 2. And we can do some tempo runs as well for our more advanced athletes. Road races are really cool to incorporate once in a while. You have your athlete do a very slow, long run and then finish with a 10K. It gives them the sensation of what it's going to feel like to finish on tired legs. They need to have been healthy and running successfully quite some before you would ever introduce that. That is an advanced concept. So your A-level athletes, beginners, are probably not going to fall into that. Your intermediates might, and your advanced certainly will. Cross-training, super critical. Half marathons, definitely something that you can throw in there as part of their training en route to their 70.3, which is en route to their Ironman. Usually, most athletes are going to do a 70.3 before they do a full. And you should really recommend it. Hiking. Your A-level athletes could do some hiking. They can do some running, then some hiking. Super good stuff. Low impact, more so, and give them the strength and the ability to just go longer. Now, for our advanced athletes only, they can build their FTP and their speed as elites, and they can actually do it. They can start with their shorter distance workouts, 30 minutes, and then it could balloon up to 90 minutes, and then by the end, before their Ironman, they're actually doing full-blown track sessions for nearly 2 hours, and it's really intense. And these are the folks that are going to try and qualify. They're going to be right on the edge the whole time trying to push themselves. And that's rare. That's really rare. So most of your athletes, they're just going to benefit from the art of the slow run. And I am going to cover this in a whole separate topic, but how to do the long bike and the long run just in general really well and successfully. But I will just say that it is like guilty pleasure slow, much of the long run stuff. Some people find it pretty boring, but I often find it my Zen mode when I do that personally. All right, so let's go on course selection. All right, so when we're selecting courses, we need to be mindful of who our athletes are. Who's our athlete, and what are they trying to accomplish? Are you a newbie and you need every opportunity to do well? A flat course is going to be great, right? A cooler, flatter race, because we don't have a lot of variability to go above your threshold on the bike, and we know that when we go into some of the higher power zones, that's going to really rob us of a good marathon. And if we're just trying to finish, our speed's going to be ultimately faster on a flat course, and that's something to consider. Hilly courses, hilly courses, I would say it depends on the weight of the athlete. Athletes who you don't want to make them gun shy just because they're a little heavier or not. I think that there are competitive athletes that certainly don't perform nearly as well on flat courses because of just the way they like to train. So really exceptionally hilly courses, you're going to have to watch some of your weight challenged athletes though, and maybe recommend that they don't start with that as their first race, but they maybe build up to it. And I put this in the 5-pound rule. This is kind of interesting. It's not always 100% accurate, but basically every 5 pounds you lose is worth about 15 to 20 minutes in an Ironman. And that's kind of wild to think about that. Now, if you're already pretty light and lean, it's not going to do you any good to lose another 5 pounds. If you are, really overweight, are you gaining 5 more pounds going to make it go 20 minutes longer? Probably not. It's kind of, for the majority, we find, within the race weight ranges that 5 pounds does tend to have quite an effect. And I can definitely attest to that to an extent. to an extent. And then weight is really not the ultimate factor. It's always in your mind. You want to frame out the, it's not a weight loss approach. It's not a FTP approach alone. It is both of them concurrently being explored to your athlete's potential. Hot races, bigger you are, taller you are, more surface area you have on your body, it's going to be a much harder race for those types of athletes. So you want your athletes to be well prepared. If they're coming out of a cool environment, that's going to be a tough race to go jump into a hot race. I can remember doing Ironman Malaysia and coming out of February winter, doing my last long run down Times Square, and it was in the snow. And I remember getting to Malaysia and it was 90 degrees and humid at 9 p.m. at night. And sweating and thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do tomorrow. So it was an adventure. I mean, I don't regret it, and I think that it is fun to do some challenging things. But for your athletes, you want to give them some options, and I think that that's something to consider. Time of year when they have to train is also impactful. If you live in the Northeast and there's a lot of snow right now, does it really make a lot of sense to be doing Ironman Texas when it's May? Because you have to be doing 5-hour bike rides on the trainer all winter long. So another kind of consideration for your athletes. I try to steer most of the winter-based athletes away from doing long course work any earlier than June, and I try to get them to do their Ironmans Lake Placid and onward. So are they going to race international? What are the local considerations in it when they're racing internationally? There's lots to consider. International travel is a whole big deal. So, if you're talking about that with your athletes and they're talking about performance, recognize that crossing time zones has a lot of challenges. Most popular races, boy, there are so many really great races that you could do and send people to do for Ironman. Certainly Lake Placid, Arizona, Florida are the biggies. Kona is a popular one too. But they're all pretty popular at the Ironman level. But non-branded ones are not a bad thing to do too. I think that a lot of athletes really enjoy them because they're unique and they're different. But most people want to do a full, they're going to want to do an Ironman branded one for the most part because of the experience and the type of product that Ironman's putting on. 70.3s, I think you can be a little more choosy with those local ones, and I think the grassroots ones are super cool. The courses tend to be a little bit more unique. So kind of neat, and your ability to help them choose what they want to do there. So I'll pause there, and that's kind of the end of my Ironman spiel for now. Questions on helping your athletes become the best Ironman athlete they can be? Cheers.
Nice. And, so actually, one thing I've noticed is that almost every quiz has at least one topic we don't cover, or like we didn't manage to talk about.
You like
so
that?
I'm always trying to check them.